Luke Warner had lived most of his life the same way he lived this morning, quiet, simple, and without much expecting anything new. He worked alone in the borderlands, far from the busy streets of town. There were mountains in the distance, dry plains around his land, and a few old fences that he repaired whenever the wind loosened them. He used to have a small herd of cattle, but months ago, after a raid no one fully understood, he lost nearly everything. People blamed him, or blamed the weather, or blamed the Apache riders who passed through the area. Luke tried not to blame anyone. He simply kept moving forward, even when the weight inside him felt heavy. He had just finished collecting supplies from a trading post and was riding home on his old horse. Dusty. The sun hung low over the horizon. Warm and soft, not yet turning harsh. Luke enjoyed this quiet part of the day, when no one asked questions and the whole land seemed at peace. As he guided Dusty along a narrow trail between two rocky rises, he noticed something that made him stop. At first it seemed like a bundle of cloth lying near the stones, maybe a traveler's bag, maybe some animal skin dropped on the ground. But something felt wrong. Luke narrowed his eyes and leaned forward in his saddle. The bundle wasn't still. It moved very slowly, like someone struggling to breathe. Luke dismounted and walked closer. The closer he came, the gentler his steps became. He didn't know why he moved softly, but he did. His instincts told him this wasn't just an abandoned sack or a loose blanket. When he finally reached the figure, he froze. It was a woman, not just any woman, an Apache woman. She lay on her side, her hand pressed to her ribs, her breath shaky, her dark hair spilled across the dust, and her eyes were half open, watching him even though she looked weak. Luke felt his heartbeat rise. Encounters between settlers and Apache people were complicated, sometimes peaceful, sometimes tense. But this woman didn't look like she could cause trouble right now. She looked injured and exhausted. He knelt beside her, staying at a respectful distance. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyelids shifted slightly. She wasn't unconscious, only struggling. She tried to lift herself, but her arm trembled and gave out. Luke reached forward without thinking, but then hesitated. He didn't know if she wanted help. He didn't know if she thought he was a threat. Still, he couldn't leave her here. No decent man would. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly, his voice slow and clear. "You're wounded. Let me help." She blinked, and that was the only answer she gave. Luke took it as permission. He slid an arm behind her shoulders and gently helped her sit upright. She winced in pain, but she didn't push him away. Her breathing stayed fast, yet she kept her eyes on him the whole time, studying him, judging him, maybe trying to understand why a stranger would stop for her. Luke lifted her carefully and carried her toward his horse. Dusty stepped forward, calm and patient. Luke placed the woman across the saddle, making sure she wouldn't fall. Her hand gripped the leather as if she didn't trust her own strength. Luke held her steady and whispered, "It's all right. I've got you." He climbed behind her and kept one arm around her so she wouldn't slip. Her posture was tense at first, but as the minutes passed, she leaned lightly against him, not fully, but enough to show she was losing strength again. The trail home felt longer than usual. Luke kept Dusty's pace slow and gentle, trying not to make the woman's pain worse. Every so often, he glanced down at her face. Her eyes stayed half open, alert even in weakness. She wasn't the sort of person who forgot to be aware. She looked like someone trained to stay watchful no matter what. When Luke reached his cabin, he lifted her off the horse with great care. She tried to stand, but her legs buckled. Luke caught her before she hit the ground. For a moment, her hand clutched his shirt, and she looked up at him, not with fear, but with something he couldn't read, something sharp, controlled, and proud. He carried her inside and laid her on his bed. The cabin was simple. A small table, a few tools, a lantern, and a single cupboard with basic supplies. Luke opened the cupboard and pulled out a bowl, a clean cloth, and a small jar of herbs he used for cuts and bruises. He wasn't a doctor, but he had learned enough over the years to manage simple wounds. He knelt beside her again. "You're safe here. I'll help you as best as I can." Her lips moved slightly. For a moment, he thought she might speak. But instead, she closed her eyes and breathed out slowly, as if simply allowing herself to rest was the biggest decision she'd made all day. Luke removed the cloth wrapped around her waist. It was soaked with sweat and dust. He didn't uncover anything more than necessary, making sure the process stayed respectful. He cleaned the wound, which wasn't deep but looked painful and swollen. It seemed like she had fallen hard, maybe hit a rock, maybe been thrown off something. Whatever happened, it left her bruised and shaken. When he finished, he stepped back and let her rest. She drank some water he offered but refused to finish the cup. She only said one word, spoken in a low, steady voice. "Warmth." Luke nodded. He placed an extra blanket over her and lit the small fire in the stove. The gentle heat began warming the room. As the flames grew, he noticed her shoulders relax a tiny bit. She finally opened her eyes enough to look at him with more focus. "Why help me?" she asked quietly. Luke shrugged and sat on the edge of the chair near the bed. "Because someone needed help. That's enough reason." "Ah. Ah." Her gaze didn't soften, but it changed. She seemed to measure him again, this time with a different kind of seriousness. She wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't grateful yet either. She was curious. Most people would have ridden away, pretending they hadn't seen anything. Luke knew that. He also knew he didn't like leaving anyone behind, no matter who they were. He didn't say that out loud because he didn't want to sound like he was trying to impress her. She watched him for another long moment before closing her eyes again. Her breathing grew calmer, and her tension faded slowly as she drifted into rest. Luke stayed awake, keeping the fire steady and listening in case she needed something. Outside, the wind brushed against the old wooden walls. Inside, everything was quiet, except the soft crackle of flames and the slow breathing of the injured woman. Hours passed. The sun fell, and night covered the plains. Luke wondered who she was, what happened to her, and why she had been lying alone on the trail. But he didn't ask yet. She needed rest more than answers. As he sat there, he couldn't shake the strange feeling that this moment, this unexpected crossing of paths, would lead to something bigger, something he couldn't see yet. But for now, all he knew was this. He had found an injured Apache woman on the trail. He had saved her, and she was sleeping safely in his cabin. What he didn't know, what he couldn't imagine, was that this woman wasn't just anyone. She wasn't a lost traveler or a simple scout. She held authority, power, and secrets that could change everything about his life. But that truth would only reveal itself later. For tonight, he only saw a wounded stranger resting by his fire, unaware that helping her had already started rewriting his fate in ways he wasn't prepared for. The next morning arrived slowly. Soft light slipped through the cracks of Luke's cabin walls and touched the wooden floor. Luke had barely slept. He had stayed awake most of the night, checking on the injured Apache woman. She breathed steadily now, no longer shaking from pain or weakness. Still, she didn't look like someone fully recovering. She looked like someone whose spirit stayed alert even while resting. When she finally opened her eyes, she stared at the ceiling for a moment, as if trying to remember where she was. Then she turned her head slightly and found Luke sitting in the chair, rubbing a tired hand over his face. She studied him quietly. It wasn't a soft look. It was sharp, like she was trying to understand him, piece by piece. "You stayed awake?" she asked. Luke nodded. "Didn't want you needing something, and me not hearing it." Her expression didn't change much. She wasn't the type to show emotions easily. But something in her eyes shifted. She looked confused for a heartbeat, then thoughtful. Luke stood, poured water into a cup, and handed it to her. She sat up slowly, holding her ribs with one hand. Even injured, she moved with a kind of strength that didn't match her condition. She didn't act fragile. She acted like someone used to fighting through pain. She drank a little more water than yesterday, then set the cup down. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You're welcome," Luke replied. "Name's Luke Warner." The woman hesitated before answering. Her eyes narrowed slightly, like she was deciding whether to share anything. Finally, she said, "Tala. Tala. Whitehorn." Luke repeated the name softly to remember it. She looked away for a moment, as if thinking deeply about something she wasn't ready to explain. Throughout the morning, Tala rested, while Luke stepped outside to chop wood and check on the old barn. But even while working, he kept glancing toward the cabin door, worried she might need help. The strange thing was, he didn't know why he cared so much about a stranger he had met only yesterday. Maybe it was because something about her felt important, or maybe it was simply because she trusted him enough to sleep here. Inside the cabin, Tala tried to sit up properly. She touched her side gently, testing the pain. Her body was healing, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Her eyes scanned Luke's simple home, his tools neatly on a wall hook, his folded blankets, the worn boots by the door. Everything told her he lived a quiet life, honest, simple. But she also sensed there was more to him. Something heavy rested behind his calm expression. When Luke stepped back inside, she watched him carefully. "You live alone?" she asked. "Mostly, yes," he replied. "Used to have cattle, but trouble came through months back. Haven't rebuilt much since." "What kind of trouble?" she asked, sounding too curious for a casual question. Luke shrugged. "Bad timing. Bad luck. Maybe bad people too." He didn't want to go into detail. Not with a stranger. But Tala's attention sharpened at those words. "People accused you?" she asked slowly. Luke paused. "Some did, but it doesn't matter now." Tala didn't believe that. She could read people. And Luke wasn't someone who forgot injustice easily. She knew that look in his eyes. Men who carried old wounds rarely admitted how deep they ran. She leaned back, studying him again. "You're honest," she said. Luke blinked. "What makes you say that? You didn't hide anything. You just didn't want to talk about it." Luke wasn't sure how to respond. Something about talking to her made him feel like she could see through him more clearly than most people. Later that afternoon, Luke decided he should ride into town for supplies, clean cloth, herbs, maybe broth mix to help her recover faster. He stood near the door, hat in hand, and said, "I'm going into town. You'll be all right here?" Tala nodded slowly. "Yes, I'll manage." Before leaving, Luke hesitated. "If you need anything, there's water on the table. Firewood stacked by the stove. I'll be back before sundown." She gave a small nod. But as the door closed behind him, her face changed. The calm look faded, and something more intense replaced it. She relaxed only when she heard Dusty's footsteps fade into the distance. Now that she was alone, Tala struggled to stand. Her ribs still hurt, but she forced herself up. She walked slowly around the cabin, observing everything carefully. Luke's tools, his supplies, the way he organized his belongings. She wasn't snooping for personal reasons. She was trying to understand the man who carried her here, trying to piece together his character. She ran her fingers lightly over the wooden table. She noticed the worn marks from years of use. She noticed the carefully folded blankets and the patched chair. This was a man who fixed things instead of throwing them away. A man who had learned patience through hardship. Tala sat back on the bed, breathing carefully. For a long moment, she closed her eyes and pictured the world outside the cabin, the people searching for her, the law she represented, the enemies she had chased, and the responsibilities waiting for her. She wasn't just an injured woman. She wasn't even just an Apache scout. She was someone with authority, someone assigned a position few knew existed yet, but Luke didn't know that, and she wasn't ready to tell him. Meanwhile, Luke rode into town. He kept quiet as he tied Dusty outside the general store. Inside, he picked up supplies and nodded politely to familiar faces. That was when he overheard two men talking near the counter. "You hear about that new sheriff?" one man asked. "Yeah, heard they're arriving any day now," the other replied. "Got a reputation, a strict one. They say this sheriff don't let criminals breathe. Hunts, rustlers, and traders who cheat people. Doesn't matter if it's day or night." Luke didn't pay much attention at first. Sheriffs came and went. But something about their tone made him pause. A new sheriff with a strong reputation usually meant big changes. He paid for the supplies and stepped outside. Before riding home, he stopped by the well, thinking about everything he'd heard. But the topic didn't stay in his mind long. His thoughts went back to Tala. He hoped she was resting and not trying to move too much. When he returned to the cabin, he found Tala sitting up straighter than before, eyes sharper, more awake. She watched him closely as he carried the supplies inside. "You were gone longer than expected," she said quietly. Luke set the items on the table. "Town was busy. Picked up more than I planned." She nodded. But something about her tone made Luke wonder if she had been worried. He didn't ask, and she didn't explain. For the rest of the evening, Tala asked questions, small ones at first. "What work do you do now? How far is town? Do many riders pass this area?" Luke answered honestly, though he didn't know why she needed this information. She listened without interrupting. Her eyes focused, as if every detail mattered. At one point, she asked, "If you saw someone dangerous on your land, what would you do?" Luke thought for a moment. "Depends who it is. But mostly, I avoid fights. Too much trouble." This answer made Tala look at him more carefully, almost with surprise. Later, as night fell again, Tala lay under the blankets, the fire warming the room. Luke prepared his chair to sleep in. Before he could sit down, Tala spoke softly. "Luke." He stopped and looked at her. "Thank you, again." He smiled slightly. "You don't need to thank me." But she shook her head. "No. I do." Luke didn't know what she truly meant, but he felt something shift in the air. The distance between them wasn't as sharp as before. She wasn't as guarded. Something like trust, small, fragile, but real, had begun to grow. She closed her eyes. But Luke could tell she wasn't fully asleep. She was thinking, weighing things, maybe carrying secrets he didn't know. Luke returned to his chair and leaned back, tired but calm. He didn't know that Tala Whitehorn was not only recovering in his cabin, but also deciding what to do with the truth she carried. He didn't know she wasn't just an injured woman. And he certainly didn't know she was the new sheriff. People whispered about the sheriff who would soon hold the power to change his life completely. But that moment was not yet here. Tonight, she was just Tala, resting by his fire, watching him through half-closed eyes, silently wondering why fate had led her to a man like Luke Warner. Luke woke before sunrise, just as he usually did. The cabin was quiet, except for the soft crackle of cooling embers in the stove. Tala lay awake too, though she pretended for a moment to still be resting. Luke didn't notice. He stepped outside to fetch more firewood. The early sky was pale, and a cold breeze brushed across the land. Luke liked this time of day. It made everything feel fresh, new, ready for change. He didn't know that change was already waiting for him. When he returned with an armful of wood, something felt different. Tala was sitting upright, fully alert. She wasn't weak like before. Her posture was straight, her expression focused. It was as if her strength had returned overnight, or maybe she had simply stopped hiding it. Before Luke could say anything, she quickly looked toward the window. Her eyes locked onto something outside. Luke followed her gaze, but he didn't see anything yet. Tala whispered, "Someone's coming." Luke frowned. "You're sure?" She nodded once, not blinking. "Horses. More than one." Luke listened carefully. A moment later, he heard it too, the rumble of hooves, slow but steady, heading straight toward his cabin. "Stay here," he said. But Tala didn't look like someone who stayed anywhere she didn't want to. Still, she didn't argue. She simply drew in a slow breath and closed her eyes for a moment, as if preparing herself. Luke stepped out onto the dirt yard just as the riders came into view. There were 4 of them, all wearing badges that glinted in the early light. They rode confidently, dust rising behind them. Luke recognized the style of their vests and hats, lawmen from a nearby county. His stomach tightened. Lawmen rarely visited quiet ranchers without a reason. The lead rider stopped a few feet from him. "Morning," the man said, tipping his hat. "We're looking for someone." Luke nodded slowly. "Who might that be?" "A woman," the deputy replied. "Apache woman. About this tall. Strong build. Last seen injured somewhere near this valley." "You seen anyone like that?" Luke's heart beat a little faster. He wasn't a man who lied easily, but he also wasn't going to hand over a stranger who needed help not without knowing the truth. He kept his face calm. "Haven't seen anyone besides deer and dust," he said. The deputy looked him over, not fully believing him. Before he could question further, the cabin door opened. Tala stepped out. Her movements were steady, controlled. She didn't hold her ribs anymore. She didn't hide her presence. She stood tall on the porch, her eyes calm and determined. Luke felt a strange mix of surprise and worry. Why had she come outside? Why now? The deputy's eyes widened when he saw her. The other riders stiffened, startled. One of them reached for something at his side, but the lead rider lifted a hand to stop him. Tala walked down the steps slowly, her face unreadable. When she reached the dirt yard, she paused for a moment, then reached beneath the cloth at her waist. Luke tensed, unsure what she was doing. But she didn't pull out a weapon. She pulled out a badge, a law badge, polished, official, unmistakable. She held it up for the deputies to see. "Put your hands down," she said firmly. "I am not your enemy." 74. "I am not your enemy." 74 with Mar. 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 The men straightened instantly, some in shock, some in confusion. The lead deputy swallowed hard. "Sheriff Whitehorn, we didn't expect to find you here." Luke felt the ground shift beneath him. Sheriff? Tala was the sheriff? The same sheriff people had whispered about yesterday? The strict one? The one known for chasing criminals without rest? Tala nodded once. "I was injured during pursuit. I took shelter until I recovered enough to continue my work." The deputy glanced at Luke, then looked back at Tala. "We were told to find you and support your orders. You've found me," she replied, "and now you will follow my instructions." Luke watched, stunned. He had carried the sheriff into his cabin, helped her heal, spoken with her as if she were just another traveler. Part of him felt embarrassed, another part felt confused. But mostly, he felt something quiet and heavy settle inside him, something like respect. The deputies stepped down from their horses, waiting for her command. Tala gestured for them to give her a moment. She walked toward Luke slowly. He didn't know what to say. She stood in front of him, looking up at him with that same steady gaze she'd had since they met. "You're the sheriff," he finally said. "Yes," she replied softly. "I am." Luke shook his head slightly in disbelief. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I had reasons," she said. "You helped me without knowing who I was. That told me more than your words ever could." He didn't know how to respond to that. He simply nodded. Tala turned to her deputies. "We leave at noon. There is business to settle." The deputies returned to their horses and waited nearby, talking quietly among themselves. Luke and Tala remained standing a few steps apart. "Do I need to worry about anything?" Luke asked carefully. He didn't want trouble with the law, not after the past months of false accusations and gossip. Tala studied him. Her face softened just a fraction. "If I thought you were someone to worry about," she said, "I would not have rested under your roof." That simple sentence shocked him more than anything else she had said. She continued, "You showed kindness without hesitation." "Many do not." Luke nodded. "Anyone would have helped." "That's not true," she said calmly. "Most would have left me there." And he didn't argue. Deep down, he knew she was right. For the next hour, they both prepared. Luke fed her horse and the deputies' mounts, while Tala changed into cleaner clothes the deputies had brought. She moved with quiet authority. Even injured, she looked like someone used to carrying responsibility. As noon approached, Tala gathered her deputies near the porch. Luke stood nearby. unsure if he should distance himself or stay close. He didn't want to seem disrespectful. Tala addressed her men. "We ride toward the border town. There are matters of law that require attention. But before that," she paused and looked toward Luke. "I have one thing to make clear." The deputies turned to follow her gaze. Luke felt suddenly very exposed, with every eye on him. "This man," Tala said firmly, "helped me when I had nothing but wounds and dust. He gave shelter without question. If anyone in this region speaks poorly of him, or treats him unfairly, they will answer to me." The deputies nodded quickly, understanding the seriousness in her tone. Luke's throat tightened at her words. No one had defended him like that in a long time. Tala stepped closer to him. She spoke quietly now, just between them. "I did not tell you who I was because I needed to see who you truly were. Now I know." Luke swallowed. "And what do you think?" "I think," she said, "that our paths crossed for a reason. Your story is not finished, and neither is mine." She mounted her horse. The deputies lined up behind her. Before riding off, Tala looked at Luke one last time. "I will return," she said, almost like a promise. Luke watched her disappear into the distance, the group of riders turning into small shapes against the plains. As the dust settled, Luke stood alone in the quiet yard, feeling a strange mix of confusion, respect, and something he couldn't yet name. He had helped an injured Apache woman. He had sheltered a stranger. And now he knew that stranger was the sheriff, the one who would soon change the direction of his life in ways he could not imagine yet. After Tala left with her deputies, Luke spent the next few days trying to return to his ordinary routine. He repaired broken fence posts, checked the small patch of land where he grew vegetables, and fed Dusty every morning. But nothing felt the same anymore. The cabin felt quieter. The air felt heavier. And Luke found himself looking toward the horizon far more often than before, half expecting to see Tala returning. He didn't understand why he felt that way. Maybe because the days he spent with her had been different from anything he had experienced in a long time. She had spoken little, but her presence had filled the cabin with something strong, something he couldn't name, but life continued, or at least, it tried to. When Luke went into town for supplies, whispers followed him like shadows. People didn't approach him directly, but he heard the murmurs. "That's the man who helped the new sheriff. He had her in his cabin for days, I heard." Sheriff Whitehorn spoke up for him. Must mean something. Luke kept his head down and avoided the gossip. But there was another whisper too, the one that made him uneasy every time he heard it. "That traitor McClary looks nervous these days." "Yeah, ever since the sheriff arrived. I heard Luke Warner was framed last season. Maybe the sheriff is digging into that." Luke didn't look back at the people talking, but the words stayed with him. He already knew the story that had ruined his reputation months ago. Cattle had gone missing, tracks leading near his property, and no one willing to believe his innocence because he lived alone and spoke little. The local trader, Everett McClary, had been the loudest voice accusing him. Luke never understood why. He walked back to his horse, trying to push the thoughts away. But as he rode home, he noticed something strange. A rider was watching him from a distance, standing near the old dry creek bed. Luke turned his horse toward him, but the man rode off the moment he approached. Luke didn't follow. He just felt that old uneasiness return. That evening, as he prepared to eat a simple meal, he thought about Tala again, her calm voice, her sharp eyes, the way she had stood in front of her deputies and defended him. He wondered if she remembered him, or if she was too busy with the work of the law. He didn't have to wonder for long. 3 days later, just as the sun was beginning to set, a group of riders appeared at the edge of his land. Luke recognized the way they rode, organized, disciplined. He stepped outside quickly. Tala was at the front. She rode with steady confidence, her expression serious but not unfriendly. When she reached him, she dismounted without a word. Her deputies waited a short distance behind her. Luke felt that same strange pull as before, but he didn't show it. "Sheriff?" he said politely. "Didn't expect you back so soon." Tala walked closer. "I said I would return." Luke didn't know why those simple words made his chest feel warm, But they did. Tala looked tired, as if she had spent days chasing something important. She studied the land around his cabin, then turned back to him. "I need to speak with you." "Alone." Luke nodded and opened the cabin door. She stepped inside, and he followed. For a moment, Tala stood in the center of the room, looking around like she was remembering her days here. The blanket she had used still lay folded neatly. The chair where Luke had stayed awake sat in its place. Everything felt the same, yet different now. Luke waited quietly until she spoke. "There are things you need to know," she said. Luke nodded. "I'm listening." Tala took a slow breath. "I've been investigating what happened to you months ago. The missing cattle, the false accusations, the traitor who blamed you." Luke froze. He hadn't expected this conversation. Tala continued. "At first, I looked into it because I believed you deserved justice for helping me. But as I searched deeper, I realized it was not a simple mistake." Her voice grew sharper. "It was intentional." Luke stared at her. "Intentional?" "Yes," she said. "The man who accused you, Everett McClary, had more to gain than anyone realized. He owed debts, he needed excuses. Blaming you protected him from questions. And people believed him because you lived alone." Luke clenched his jaw. He didn't speak. The memory of that unfair treatment still lived inside him. Tala stepped closer. "I found witnesses who say McClary convinced them to lie. I found old papers he tried to hide. And when I confronted him, he offered me a deal." Luke's eyes narrowed. "What kind of deal?" "He said he would give me names of people involved in illegal trade near the border if I stopped looking into your case." Luke felt anger rise, but he kept his voice steady. "Did you take the deal?" Tala met his gaze. "No. I don't make deals with liars." Luke felt something shift inside him, respect, admiration, maybe both. Tala continued. "When he realized I wouldn't back down, he tried to run. My deputies chased him, but he escaped into the desert." She paused. "I need your help to find him." Luke blinked. "My help? Why me?" "Because you know this land better than any deputy. Because he will try to hide in places you've ridden past 100 times. And because this is your name he tried to destroy. You deserve to see this through." Luke didn't speak for a long moment. Inside, he felt something stirring, something he thought he had lost months ago. A sense of purpose. A desire for truth. A wish to clear his name once and for all. Finally, he nodded. "I'll help." Tala gave a small, satisfied nod. "Good." "We leave in the morning." They spent the evening planning. Tala spread a hand-drawn map on the table, marking areas where McClary might hide. Luke pointed out old caves, dry riverbeds, abandoned huts, and steep passes where tracks were easier to miss. Sometimes their hands brushed while pointing at the same spot. Neither spoke about it, but both noticed. By nightfall, the plan was ready. Tala stood and looked at him with a calm seriousness. "Luke, thank you." He shrugged lightly. "I didn't do much. You helped me when I was injured. Now you're helping me again," she said. "That matters." Luke didn't reply. He simply nodded. Tala walked toward the door. Before stepping outside, she paused. For the first time since he met her, her voice softened. "I meant what I said," she murmured. "Our paths crossed for a reason." Then she stepped outside into the night. Luke watched her go, feeling something warm settle in his chest. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. Tomorrow, they would ride together side by side. A cowboy and a sheriff searching for truth, for justice, and maybe for something more than either of them had expected when their lives first crossed on that dusty trail. But tonight, Luke sat alone in his cabin, thinking about Tala's words, the fire crackling gently beside him, and the feeling that his life was finally moving toward something brighter. The morning of the search arrived quietly. A soft fog hung over the land, and the air felt cooler than usual. Luke saddled Dusty, while Tala prepared her deputies. Her face was focused, calm, and ready. Even though she had recovered from her injuries, traces of pain still showed when she moved too quickly. but she ignored it without complaint. Luke watched her for a moment. He admired how she carried herself with strength, dignity, and purpose. She didn't need to shout to lead. Her deputies listened to her because they believed in her, not because they feared her. Luke wondered if anyone ever truly saw the weight she carried on her shoulders. When Tala walked over to him, she gave him a small nod. "We ride east first. McClary knows that area. He won't go far from the canyon trails." Luke nodded. "I know a narrow path he might use. We can try there." They rode out together, followed by the deputies in a steady line. The sun slowly pushed the fog away, revealing the wide-open land in its pale, golden beauty. Birds flew overhead, and dust lifted behind the hooves of the horses. For a moment, Luke felt a familiar peace, the kind he used to feel before trouble found him months ago. Tala rode beside him, her posture straight, her eyes always scanning the land. She didn't say much, but her presence felt grounding, as if she understood the land the same way he did. After an hour, they reached a rocky stretch near an old dry riverbed. Luke brought Dusty to a halt. "Tracks," he said, pointing to footprints in the dust. "Fresh." Tala dismounted and knelt beside the tracks. She studied them carefully. "3 riders passed here," she said quietly. "One of them is McClary. The other 2 look like men he hired." Luke raised an eyebrow. "He got help?" Tala nodded. "Some men follow money over truth." The deputies spread out, searching the area. Luke and Tala rode ahead, following the trail deeper into the canyon. The walls rose on both sides, narrow and quiet. Luke didn't like it. Too many places to hide. Too easy for an ambush. Tala sensed the same thing. She slowed her horse and whispered, "Stay alert." They moved deeper until the canyon widened again. Luke spotted movement near a cluster of rocks and stopped. Tala followed his gaze. 3 men stood near a dry tree trunk. One of them, thin, nervous, constantly shifting, was Everett McClary. Even from a distance, McClary looked troubled, sweating despite the cool air. Tala dismounted first, stepping forward with calm authority. Luke followed her, keeping just half a step behind. When McClary saw Tala, he froze. "Sheriff, listen, this ain't what you think," he said, raising his hands. Tala's voice didn't rise, but it carried strength. "You ran from the law. You tried to bribe me. You lied about an honest man. And you planned to escape with help." McClary shook his head wildly. No, it weren't like that. Things got out of hand. I didn't mean to frame him." Luke stepped forward slightly. "Didn't mean to? You ruined my life." McClary looked at Luke with panic. "It was only supposed to buy me time. You were alone. I thought no one would care." Luke felt anger burning through him, but he didn't move. Tala glanced at him with a calm warning, reminding him she was handling this. The 2 men with McClary stepped closer, trying to look intimidating. Tala shifted her stance slightly but didn't flinch. "You can lower your shoulders," she told them quietly. "This ends today." McClary swallowed. "Sheriff, please, let's make a deal again. I can pay." "No," Tala cut him off sharply. "There is no deal. Not today." One of McClary's hired men reached for something hidden at his waist, but before he could fully move, Tala stepped forward and spoke in a tone that froze him mid-motion. "Don't," she said. "I don't want trouble, but I will finish it if you start it." The man slowly lowered his hand. McClary's face lost its color. He knew he had no way out. Tala gave a small nod to her deputies, who had quietly arrived behind them. Within seconds, the hired men were held securely, and McClary stood alone in front of Tala. She approached him slowly. "Tell the truth," she said. "Right here. Right now. No lies." McClary looked down, defeated. His voice trembled. "Fine. I lied. I told people Luke Warner stole cattle. I said he hid the tracks. I made it all up. I needed someone to blame to cover my own mistakes." Tala turned to Luke. "Is that enough?" Luke didn't care for drama. He only needed honesty. He gave a small nod. But Tala wasn't done. She faced McClary again. You will repeat this confession in front of the townspeople and the council. And you will face punishment for your lies. McClary nodded miserably, knowing he had lost. The deputies prepared to take him away. But before they left, Tala walked back to Luke. She looked at him with a softer expression than she had shown anyone else. Your name will be cleared, she said. I will make sure of it. Luke felt something inside him loosen, something he had carried for months. Thank you, he said quietly. Later that afternoon, they returned to town with McClary in custody. A crowd gathered, as Tala spoke clearly and firmly about the truth. She made McClary confess publicly. People listened with wide eyes, some ashamed, some surprised. Others came up to Luke afterward, offering small apologies, awkward words, and quiet respect. For the first time in a long time, Luke felt his shoulders lighten. He felt seen. Not as the man people whispered about, but as someone honest. Someone who deserved better. When everything settled, Tala walked over to him at the edge of the town square. The sun was dipping low, casting warm light across her face. It's done, she said. Luke nodded. I don't know how to thank you. You already did, she replied. You helped me when you didn't know who I was. That was thanks enough. They stood together quietly, watching people drift away. Luke didn't know what to say next. Tala broke the silence. What will you do now? She asked gently. Luke shrugged. Start again, I guess. Build my herd, fix things, maybe have some peace. Tala looked thoughtful. And if you needed help? Luke smiled faintly. I know someone who's good at giving it. Tala's lips curved just slightly. It wasn't a big smile. But for her, it was something deep. She stepped a little closer. Our paths crossed for a reason. Luke Warner. I don't believe in accidents. Luke felt something warm move inside him. Not fast, not confusing, just steady. I don't either, he said softly. A gentle breeze moved between them. Tala looked up at him with calm eyes that held strength and kindness at once. You ever need me, she said quietly. You know where to find me. And you ever need a place to rest, Luke replied. My cabin's always open. They didn't make promises. They didn't rush anything. But the understanding between them was clear, strong, steady, real. As Tala mounted her horse and prepared to leave, she paused one last time. Take care of yourself, Luke. You too, Sheriff, he replied. She gave him a small, knowing look before riding away with her deputies. Luke watched her until she disappeared behind the hills, feeling something new inside him. Hope. Respect. A quiet bond he didn't expect to find. His life had changed, piece by piece, from the moment he found her on the trail. And somewhere in the distance, Tala carried the same quiet truth with her, that fate had tied their paths together. Not by accident, but by something deeper. Their story wasn't over. It had only just begun.